Okay, so my summary of Middlemarch by George Eliot. I'm going to be looking at Book 1, Chapter 1 through 5. So, a little introduction. The book is written by a woman, Mary Ann Evans, who used George Eliot as a pen name since women really couldn't be published in the 1870s. It was split into 8 different books and then a finale. And there is an introduction to the book, which is really quite handy. It says it has a lot of themes and character analysis. Book 1 centers around Miss Brooke, who, since it is named after her, Miss Dorothy Brooke. She has a sister, Celia, whom basically just follows her around. Dorothy and Celia were orphaned and are being raised by their uncle. Dorothy and Celia are very different. Dorothy is straightforward and scholarly. She believes that everything good is a sin. So she's very Puritan in her religion. She longs for knowledge and to get what males have in their education. In Chapter 1, you see her being an architect, and she wants to help the poor and to help with the social condition during this time. She's very pretty, and she's very polite, though. Celia is also very pretty, yet she's more simplistic than Dorothy. She is very sly, though. She's able to point out her sister's flaws without getting her wrath, and she's able to persuade her to do things that she normally wouldn't do. In Chapter 1, she persuades Dorothy to pick out some necklaces of their mothers, despite Dorothy's religious conviction that she shouldn't. Celia then later worries that the necklace might interfere with her prayers, a notion that today seems ridiculous. But with that example, it shows how Celia and Dorothy kind of coexist. Dorothy's religious ideals slide onto Celia, and they make her feel guilty when she can't uphold them. Now in Chapter 2, Sir James Chetham and Mr. Casaubon come over to the house to talk to Mr. Brooke, their uncle. Sir James makes an effort to get Dorothy into the conversation, but her uncle dismisses her opinions when she speaks. It's during this visit that Dorothy starts to fancy Mr. Casaubon, who is a much older scholar. He's not very good looking, but he has good name, good position in the society. Now, Sir James points out the fact that Dorothy likes to ride, and she promptly tells him that she's giving it up because she enjoys it, going back to the ideas that anything good is sort of a sin, and you have to keep yourself away from it. He can't really fathom why, but Mr. Casaubon backs her up. Later, Cecilia makes fun of Mr. Casaubon's looks, because he is rather old and he's not very good looking, but Dorothy defends him, saying that he has a great soul. Now it's worth talking about the narrator. It's not just Dorothy. Despite seeing Dorothy's point of view all the time, the narrator seems to be omnipresent. The narrator gives us insights into everybody's thoughts and feelings and even foreshadows future events. And these long drawn-out narratives and metaphors and similes are actually really hard to read, considering it's the 18th century lingo and you're not really quite sure what's going on sometimes. But they are worth it to read, because here they have some beautiful phrasings, and also besides that, the narrator also tells you things. Through the narrator, you learn that Celia believes that Sir James will propose to Dorothy Brooke, and that Dorothy believes that Sir James will propose to Celia. But Celia's not always really that kind to James. She's actually really blunt with him, even though he seems to miss signs of her aggregation with him. She really only has eyes for Casaubon right now, which he seems to completely miss, but we're going to forgive him for that. Chapter 3 starts off very introspective. Dorothy is thinking over her feelings for Mr. Casaubon, which actually could be reciprocated by the fact that he comes to the house pretty often and comes to talk to her. She starts to believe that he might make her his wife, and she decides that she will finally get to see the truth that great men already know when she's married to him. After he leaves, she goes out thinking, and Sir James rides in. He has this really small dog with him, and he wants to give it to Celia, but Dorothy dislikes dogs, and she bluntly tells him that, and he gets rid of it. Celia loves dogs, but James seems to wish to please Dorothy above Celia. After seeing Dorothy's architecture plans from Chapter 1, James agrees to let Dorothy build cottages on his land for the poor, since she believes it it's very good for them. This makes her happy after feeling guilty about the dog. And Dorothy believes James is doing this to win her favor in order to get to Celia. And Dorothy later talks, or she doesn't really talk, she thinks to herself about how James will be so lucky to have her as a sister-in-law when she marries Celia, so she can guide him because he needs direction. He's not really a straightforward thinker, and he's always asking for her opinion on things. However, Dorothy has not considered that he's being nice to win her favor, and rather she thinks it's just to please Celia. In Chapter 4, Celia and Dorothy are taking a cottage ride after going down to see the beginning of the architecture being built on James's land, and as they're leaving there, you kind of see them playing around and you learn nicknames for each other, and the reason why I'm telling you this is Dorothy's nickname is Dodo. Dodo is very short and it's very nifty for annotations. Celia is nicknamed Kitty, not really sure why. But Celia reveals her thoughts and her slave's gossip. Her slave is named Tantrip, that Sir James will propose to Dorothy, and Dorothy actually gets really upset about this. Eventually, she starts crying. She's crying about this. They get back to the house, and her uncle isn't really concerned when she comes in crying. He chalks it up to religious excessiveness. The fact that he doesn't even ask means this must happen a lot. She is a really extreme religious fanatic, as Mr. Casaubon is too. So Mr. Brooke, their uncle, asks to see Dorothy in his office, and she obliges. He talks that Mr. Casaubon is lonely and is seeking a companion, but is still rather older. He is a good man with good name, and he's got good position in the community, which is good, and that he's also asked Mr. Brooke's permission to marry Dorothy. He just kind of throws it out there at the end of the paragraph. Dorothy rushes to accept. Sir James not even thought about. And Mr. Brooke tries to persuade her to take some more time to think about it. I mean, there's no need to rush at all. Mr. Casaubon is 45, and he's 27 years older than Dorothy. Okay, don't need to do the math. I already did it for you. Dorothy is 18. So she'll be 18 marrying a 45-year-old. This ought to go well. So anyway, she's super excited. Mr. Brooke gives her the letter that has Mr. Casaubon's actual proposal to her in it, and we're going to wait till Chapter 5 to read it. So, Chapter 5, Mr. Casaubon's letter. It's rather short, and actually I suggest that you read it. It gives a sense of Mr. Casaubon's character, really. It's on page 43 and 44. He's not really a good love poet, but he's kind of very scientific in his writings. She writes her own little short letter that's saying, "Yes, I love you for thinking that I'm worthy to be your wife." And it's kind of important, her little letter there. It really sets the tone for their marriage. Dorothy is always basking below her husband. She's to serve him before herself, while James, he would have done anything to keep her happy, and he would have asked for her direction. So sort of keep that in mind, the differences between these two guys. Dorothy thinks herself lower because of her lesser knowledge of things that Mr. Casaubon has good opinions about. She actually goes out and learns things that Mr. Casaubon has interest in, simply because she wants to help him and that she wants to seem intelligent to him. Celia is later told in Chapter 5 that Mr. Casaubon's coming to the house for dinner, and she makes rather snide remarks about him, until Dorothy announces to her that they're engaged, and Celia backs off, realizing how bad those insults were now. But it's all good, and the dinner goes smoothly, and Dorothy and Mr. Casaubon are very much in love, but there is one final remark on the chapter that I kind of really thought was important, and it was this quote: "Dorothy was not in the least teaching Mr. Casaubon to ask if he were good enough for her, but merely asking herself anxiously how could she be good enough for Mr. Casaubon." And I felt like this is really important foreshadowing. She's going to always be asking herself, what could she be doing for Mr. Casaubon? It's really important to her that this goes well, that he is like her god, her shining knowledge god, I guess. Okay, so that's pretty much chapters 1 through 5. So, woo.